It's May 26th here in Seoul, and I'm Kim Dami. We begin with the stories making the headlines at this hour, starting with the campaigning for South Korea's June 3rd presidential election. With just 8 days left until the big day, the main contenders are pushing through the last week of their campaigns across the country. The Democratic Party's Lee Jae-myung pledged to launch a task force to tame the economic crisis, while the People Power Party's Kim Moon-soo vowed to revise the party's charter to limit presidential interference in party affairs. Russia over the weekend struck Ukraine with its largest drone and missile attack of the war, killing at least 12 people, and also prompting Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to slam the U.S. for what he calls silence. U.S. President Donald Trump ramps up pressure on Harvard University, now urging the Ivy League school to disclose names and nationalities of all of its international students. Days after his administration's push to revoke the school's ability to enroll foreign students was blocked by a judge. We are now 8 days away from the election day, and on-board voting, in fact, begins from Monday to Thursday, allowing some 30,000 Korean aboard 454 ships to vote. Polling stations are set up on ships under the watch of a designated observer. The ballots will be sent directly via fax to the city or provincial election commission that presides over each voter's registered address. On-board voting was first introduced in 2012 for the 18th presidential election. Now it's only held for presidential and parliamentary elections. In the last presidential election held in 2022, 95.1% of those registered on-board voters cast their ballots. Also this week, early voting booths will be open throughout the country on Thursday and Friday from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. And with that being said, this past weekend was the final weekend before early voting, which kept the contenders busier than ever. The Liberal Party's Lee Jae-myung spent the weekend promising people to revitalize the economy, while the People Power Party continued to request a merger with the Reform Party. Our Kim Do-yeon reports.
The Democratic Party candidate Lee Jae-myung held a press conference on Sunday ahead of early voting later this week, where he reiterated that restoring the economy is his top priority. But he also reminded voters of what triggered the election in the first place, the declaration of martial law.
Those who threatened our constitutional order and public safety must be held accountable, but I will not engage in political retaliation targeting individuals.
On the economic front, Lee pledged to launch a presidential emergency task force to tackle inflation and tariffs, and said a supplementary budget will follow to jumpstart growth. Lee spent Sunday in the Chungcheongdo provinces after making stops in Gyeonggi-do province, a familiar region where he previously served as governor. Both areas are key swing regions expected to play a decisive role in the race. Kim Moon-soo of the People Power Party chose Gyeongsangbuk-do province, a conservative stronghold, for Saturday. In Daegu, Kim met with former President Park Geun-hye and argued that her impeachment had been unjust. The location and message come as he tries to strengthen support among traditional PPP supporters who aren't so enthusiastic yet. But at the same time, he appeared to draw a line between himself and another impeached president, Yoon Suk-yeol.
Criticism that the party is controlled by the president and his aides will no longer stand. I will put an end to power-driven, factional politics.
Kim pledged to revise the PPP charter to block presidential interference in party affairs, seen as a direct response and criticism over Yoon's role in internal decisions. Meanwhile, Reform Party candidate Lee Jun-seok campaigned in the capital region, targeting younger voters and doubling down on attacks against both rivals, Lee Jae-myung for progressive economic policies and Kim Moon-soo for his stance on martial law. As ballots began printing on Sunday, Lee's name was confirmed as the fourth on the list, regardless of any merger talks with the PPP. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
And on Friday, political mudslinging took over the talk on social policy as the four leading presidential contenders held their second debate. Our Oh Soo-young has the highlights.
While promising social unity, presidential candidates clashed ferociously over politics and policy in their second televised debate. Focusing on social affairs, Friday's topic were social division, social safety nets, and sustainability. The Democratic Party's Lee Jae-myung said he would overcome social division and inequality with technology such as artificial intelligence and continue to improve the current national pension system. As the former Labour minister, the People Power Party's Kim Mun-soo promised to build wider income safety nets for small businesses with improved pension schemes. Reform candidate Lee Jun-seok proposed a major pension overhaul, pointing out that the two major parties' legislative revision last year benefits the older generation, while adding a $37,000 burden on every young Korean. He also called for cuts to unnecessary high-tech scams that ramp up health insurance premiums. Democratic Labour's Kon Young-guk suggested doubling the basic pension to over $500 and building scores of state-run hospitals. Candidates also clashed over climate and energy policies. Left-leaning candidates continued pushing for renewable energy sources over nuclear power. Kim Mun-soo and Lee Jun-seok argued that nuclear power is much more efficient, affordable, and essential to support future industries like AI. But politics overrode policy throughout the two-hour debate. Lee Jae-myung said Kim Mun-soo was part of the impeached Yoon Suk-yeol administration that declared martial law last year.
The most extreme form of social conflict is an insurrection by martial law. Weren't they trying to completely wipe out the opposition?
Kim Mun-soo accused Lee's party of insurrection for handing radical left-wing group seats in parliament and underscored Lee's 5 criminal trials.
In corruption cases like Baek Hyun-dong and Dae Jang-dong, just look at how many people close to him are in prison or have died under suspicious circumstances. Uprooting lies and corruption is the first step towards national unity.
Lee Jun-seok blasted both the leading parties. He said that while the Conservatives are tarnished with Yoon's martial law, the majority Democratic Party is just as guilty of creating a broken society.
You should be ashamed. Those who are jointly responsible for wrecking the country show up in red and blue, only different in color, fighting over power in a shameless world.
The third and final live debate takes place on Tuesday, focusing on politics. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
And official ballots are now being printed as South Korea prepares for the snap presidential election next Tuesday. But questions over a possible conservative merger still linger. Let's turn to Professor Mason Ricci for more. Good morning, Professor Ricci.
Hi, good morning.
So the nation's election watchdog started printing the ballots out on Sunday, which means that even if there's a conservative merger, the Reform Party's Lee Jun-seok's name is there on the paper, but under the term resignation. Now, at that point, a merger wouldn't be as meaningful, would it?
Yeah, that's right. You know, whenever this type of thing happens at the last minute, the fact is, there is always the possibility of ballot confusion. Especially among older people who perhaps don't follow politics particularly closely. So indeed, mathematically, I mean, this is almost certain to hurt the Conservative Party if the merger were to happen, at least in some small way, because of ballot confusion. Whether or not it really makes much of a material difference, of course, is a second question. The other thing, of course, really is more the sort of spirit of that merger. And I think that there's a decent argument to be made that if a merger were to come about at this point, it might simply indicate that conservative unity has been too little and come too late, especially after all of the acrimony over the Han Duck-soo, Kim Mun-soo merger possibility, the way that shook out. And then, finally, there's also the question of whether or not Lee Jun-seok voters under a merger situation would go 1-to-1 for Kim Mun-soo, which is not necessarily guaranteed either. And some of the polling data indicates that's not the case. Most of his supporters are indeed conservative, but some of them skew differently in terms of their attachments, in terms of political ideology, and might not support Kim Mun-soo 100%.
Well, I do have to mention a second and final window closes this Wednesday, though, the eve of early voting. I know the merger, a possible merger, seems highly unlikely at this point, but if it does happen, in what shape or form do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's either going to happen or it's not. The chances are 50-50. And, I really think, if you're Lee Jun-suk, obviously you have all the cards in this respect. Kim Moon-soo, clearly wants the merger to happen for obvious reasons. And Lee Jun-suk has held out for a lot of different reasons. Some of them, I think, go back to in fact, much of it perhaps even goes back to the acrimony over his being forced out of party leadership earlier by the old party elephants. The accusations of sexual misconduct, sexual harassment, and the way that resulted in party suspension, and essentially the sense that Lee Jun-suk was sort of forced out of the party in some sense. That's clearly left some scars. And then more pragmatically, if you're Lee Jun-suk, you're going to ask yourself the question of, what do you get? What type of influence do you get in a Kim Moon-soo government, for instance? So what type of influence do your political allies get? Put differently, the question that Lee Jun-suk has to ask himself is, how would a merger help him for the future, right? He's still young, he's still a future conservative flag bearer. And in that sense, he wants, I think, to set himself up for the future as much as he does for right now. And I would argue that given the situation that we're in now, probably the best political calculus for him, I'm thinking, at least in terms of what he thinks, is that he stays in the race. He gets to argue that he has principles. He doesn't attach himself to the old guard in the Conservative Party, in the PPP. And he sets himself up also to see what type of sort of floor of support he would have through actually going through the election. And that would give him some information about what his political future would be in future presidential elections.
Definitely. He is a young contender, youngest contender out of the all runners. Professor Ritchie, we have to talk about the second president-to-TV debate last Friday. Now, how constructive do you think that the debate was this time?
Not very. It wasn't a very good debate. There were a lot of personal attacks. There was a lot of mudslinging. It's not just in Korea. This happens all over. This happens in the United States. This happens in Europe. I increasingly question really how valuable these debates are, to be honest with you. They were supposed to debate about social welfare related issues, but honestly, they didn't talk about that nearly as much as they probably should have. It was really only in the back half of the debate. Lee Jae-myung spent a good portion of the debate essentially continuing to make the election a referendum on democracy, where he thinks he had stronger cards to play because of the martial law incident and former President Yoon's removal from power. He did eventually come around to talk about some other things like working hours and better corporate regulation and a sort of quote-unquote fairer economic system in Korea. Kim Moon-soo spent a lot of time talking about how Lee Jae-myung is not trustworthy, calling attention to his scandals and his lawsuits, essentially calling Lee Jae-myung a corrupt radical. He did, of course, talk about some economic issues as well, notably, for instance, pension reform. And then Lee Jun-suk basically spent most of his time attacking both parties. Essentially said that the conservatives do have the martial law stain attached to them, and there's nothing they can do to get that out, while also blaming the Democratic Party for radicalizing politics in Korea and essentially being jointly responsible. So there was a lot of mudslinging, a lot of personal attacks, and not a lot of substance about policy going forward.
What usually happens in all presidential debates across the globe. Now, the next 8 days will be crucial for all runners. Now, how do you think the Liberal candidate Lee Jae-myung, who is showing a strong lead, will spend the coming week?
Yeah, so I think in the first place, he's going to continue to hammer home what he considers to be, his huge advantage, and I think he's right analytically about that, and that is essentially making this election a referendum about the December 3rd martial law. He'll of course add to that. We've seen him, tacking to the middle and trying to make himself and his party come across as moderate, pragmatic, whether that be about domestic issues in Korea, for instance, tax reform, or whether that be foreign policy, where, for instance, Lee Jae-myung's tried to say the right things, for instance, about continuing the alliance with the United States and even in a trilateral context with Japan. So he'll talk about those things, and then Kim Moon-soo, we'll see him continue to hammer away at Lee Jae-myung as being corrupt. We'll see him obviously behind the scenes try to put this merger together, which of course is really a sine qua non for his ability to win this election. We'll see him continue to try to make himself look like a moderate conservative. Also, he'll continue to draw attention to his labor activist background. He'll continue to talk in terms of foreign policy about reliance on the alliance with the United States, notably with respect to trade, in addition to the obvious security issues. And then Lee Jun-suk, I imagine, is going to spend as much time as anything else, in one way or another, trying to set up his political future, so much as he is trying to influence this particular presidential campaign.
All right, Professor Richie, thank you so much for joining us this morning. You have a wonderful day.
Great, thank you. You as well.
Russia's massive aerial assault on Ukraine over the weekend left at least 12 people dead, including children. Ukrainian leader blasted Washington over its silence. Our Kim Bo-kyung has the details.
At least 12 people were killed and 60 wounded in different regions of Ukraine after the Kremlin launched a series of air assaults throughout Ukraine late Saturday night. Among those killed were 3 children from the same family in the Zhytomyr region, west of Kyiv, according to Ukraine's Internal Affairs Minister.
Let the world wake up and see. How long can they bomb children? We go to bed and do not know what awaits us in the morning.
Nearly 300 attack drones and almost 70 missiles of various types were fired, according to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on his social media X account, where he said ordinary citizens were subject to deliberate attacks. Zelensky condemned America's silence, saying it encouraged Putin, and asked for sanctions that would show the determination of the U.S. and European countries to stop Russia's brutality. Later on Sunday, U.S. President Donald Trump's special envoy for Ukraine and Russia, Keith Kellogg, called Russia's overnight attacks a clear violation of the 1977 Geneva Peace Protocols designed to protect innocents. The protocol is an annex to the Geneva Convention signed in 1949, containing provisions for the protection of victims of international armed conflicts. Europe, too, strongly condemned Russia and warned of additional sanctions. German Foreign Minister Johann Vadeful said Putin, having no interest in peace, should not be tolerated and that the EU will agree to further sanctions. EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy Kaja Kallas was on the same page, stating the strongest international pressure was needed to make Russia end the war. The assault overnight into Sunday came despite the largest prisoner swap of the war taking place. Ukraine brought home 303 prisoners of war on Sunday in the final phase of a 1,000 for 1,000 prisoner exchange with Russia. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
The U.S. has pressed Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to delay plans for a full-scale ground offensive in Gaza. That's according to a report in the Jerusalem Post on Sunday that said the request made in order to allow ceasefire negotiations and a hostage deal proceed in parallel with the military operations. With the ceasefire negotiations deadlocked, Israel has intensified its bombardment and ground invasion in Gaza, with reports saying that the Israeli army controls over 77% of the Gaza Strip. In Gaza, a 4-year-old child died on Saturday due to severe malnutrition, bringing the death toll from hunger-related causes in the besieged enclave to 58. 9 children were also killed in an Israeli airstrike that struck a family home in Khan Yunis on Friday. U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth visited the Korean War Veterans Memorial Park in Washington, D.C., joining cleanup efforts and highlighting the significance of the war. Marking the Memorial Day weekend, Hegseth cleaned the memorial's statues and monuments with his children on Saturday. Hegseth emphasized that the effort was more than just a cleanup, saying it's a chance to remind the kids what the Korean War was and why it mattered, according to the Defense Department. Secretary of Veterans Affairs Doug Collins also joined the cleaning up. U.S. President Donald Trump continues his war with Harvard University, this time demanding that the school provide his administration with the names of all of its international students. Taking to Truth Social on Sunday, Trump called on the school to provide names and countries of all of its international students, stressing that some of the countries of the schools come from are not friendly to the U.S. According to Harvard's latest data, this will mean names of over 6,700 international students. Meanwhile, other schools are expressing concern over the Trump administration's ban on Harvard's international students, including the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Its president said the government's decision is a fatal blow to American excellence, openness, and creativity.
Good morning, I'm Choi Ji-hee, and this is The World Now. Police in southern France are investigating the possibility of organized arson after blackouts on Saturday and Sunday in Cannes and Nice, respectively, disrupted daily life and critical infrastructure. On Saturday, a fire at an electrical substation near Cannes caused a blackout affecting approximately 160,000 households. The outage coincided with the closing day of the Cannes Film Festival, though the event at the main venue ended seamlessly using backup generators. Also in the early hours of Sunday, a second incident occurred in Nice, where damage to an electrical facility left around 45,000 homes without power. An anonymous group claiming to be anarchists posted a statement online claiming responsibility for the Cannes outage, asserting they had sabotaged key electrical infrastructure. Authorities have not verified this claim but have launched criminal investigations into both incidents. Nice mayor condemned the attacks and has ordered an increase in police protection for sensitive electrical installations. Iran's Supreme National Security Council, the country's highest decision-making body, has suspended the enforcement of a contentious hijab law, despite its prior approval by parliament. On Sunday, Iranian Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf announced that the SNSC had directed Parliament not to implement the law to support the family by promoting chastity and hijab. The legislation was passed in December 2023 and aimed to impose stricter penalties on women violating mandatory hijab regulations, including heavy fines and imprisonment. The law had faced significant domestic and international criticism, with the United Nations describing it as gender apartheid. While the decision is seen by some as weakening Islamic principles, others argue for individuals' freedoms and women's rights. On Sunday, Pope Leo XIV assumed his role as Bishop of Rome by taking possession of the St. John Lateran Basilica, the cathedral or throne of the Diocese of Rome. By completing the final ceremony, the Pope completed the symbolic taking possession of 4 basilicas that signify full papal authority within Rome. During evening Mass on the same day, the pontiff declared, "I am Roman." He also highlighted the importance of listening and collaboration within the Church. Pope Leo, the first American-born pontiff, has now completed the formalities to become the Bishop of Rome after succeeding Pope Francis on May 8th. Starbucks announced on Monday it planned to implement the coffee franchise's first self-order kiosks in select stores across tourist-heavy areas in South Korea and Japan. The kiosks are aimed at enhancing the customer experience by reducing wait times and streamlining the ordering process. In South Korea, the kiosks will debut at the Starbucks Korea branch in Myeongdong, one of Seoul's most crowded shopping districts, visited by international tourists. Customers are expected to be able to use the machines as early as next month. Starbucks Japan is also set to implement kiosks at around the same time. Unlike Starbucks' traditional service model that emphasizes human connection, the technology aims to make ordering easier while also appealing to customers who prefer minimal interaction.
We had such a pleasant day yesterday, along with a gentle breeze and plenty of sunshine. As we kick off the last week of May, summer is truly making its presence known. As we head into the latter half of the week, temperatures in the capital will climb a little higher, ushering in that summer feel. And the sun will be quite strong today across the country. The UV index will be very high, especially in the central regions, and ozone concentrations will likely be unhealthy in most parts. So make sure you're protecting your skin. Most areas of Korea will see highs jumping to 26 degrees Celsius this afternoon, along with that plenty of sunshine and decent air quality. And we're looking at mostly clear weather for the next few days in the capital area with that warmth. But keep an eye out for passing showers in the eastern regions tomorrow and the day after.
That is all we have for this morning. Arirang News will be back at 5 p.m. Korea time. Thanks for watching.